When the slave auction brought Aisling before Prince Bjorn's throne, her defiant words, "A true warrior earns loyalty, not buys it," should have cost her life. Instead, they cost him his soul. But sometimes the strongest chains are forged not from iron, but from the fierce courage of an unbroken spirit. The great hall of Ironhold fell silent as the last batch of Celtic captives was dragged before Prince Bjorn's throne. The winter raids had been profitable. Grain, silver, and slaves enough to last until spring's thaw. Bjorn sat motionless on his carved seat, his ice-blue eyes scanning the wretched prisoners with the detached interest of a wolf evaluating sheep. 20 pieces of silver for the strong ones, 10 for the weak, declared Thorvald the slaver, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Fresh from the emerald shores of Erin, my lord. Prime stock for your household. Most of the captives cowered before the fearsome prince, their spirits already broken by weeks of harsh travel and brutal treatment. But one stood differently among them, a young woman with flame-red hair that caught the torchlight like molten copper. Despite the iron shackles around her wrists and ankles, despite the torn green dress that marked her noble birth, she held her head high with a pride that seemed to burn like beacon fire. "That one," Bjorn said, pointing with his battle-scarred finger. "Bring her forward." The guards roughly pushed Aisling toward the throne, their heavy hands leaving bruises on her pale arms. She stumbled but refused to fall, catching herself with a grace that spoke of years of warrior training. When she finally stood before the prince, her emerald eyes met his without flinching, a dangerous act of defiance that should have earned her a beating. "Your name, thrall," Bjorn commanded, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power. "I am Aisling of Clan MacBride," she replied, her Irish accent thick with pride and barely contained fury. "Daughter of High King Cormac, trained in the sacred groves of the Druids. I am no thrall." A ripple of shock ran through the assembled court. No slave had ever dared speak with such boldness to their prince. Bjorn's warriors reached for their weapons, expecting him to order her immediate execution for such insolence. Instead, something unexpected happened. The corner of Bjorn's mouth twitched, not with anger, but with what might have been amusement. "A king's daughter," he mused, leaning forward in his throne. "Then you understand the value of loyalty to one's lord." "I understand the difference between loyalty earned and obedience bought," Aisling shot back, her voice ringing clear as a bell across the hall. "A true warrior inspires devotion through honor, not fear. Real strength comes from those who choose to follow, not those forced to serve." The hall erupted in angry shouts from the Viking nobles calling for her death. But Bjorn raised his hand for silence, his piercing gaze never leaving her face. In those defiant green eyes he saw something that stirred feelings he'd thought long dead: respect, curiosity, and something far more dangerous that he couldn't yet name. 50 silver pieces, Bjorn declared, his voice cutting through the murmurs of his court like a blade. "I'll take this one for my personal household." The price was outrageous, enough to buy 5 strong male slaves or a war horse. Thorvald's eyes gleamed with greed as he quickly agreed, while the court nobles exchanged puzzled glances. Why would their prince pay such a fortune for one defiant girl, when he could have his pick of any woman in the kingdom? As the transaction concluded and gold changed hands, Aisling felt the weight of her new reality settling upon her shoulders. She was no longer a king's daughter or a free woman of Erin. She was property, bought and paid for like livestock. Yet even as the guards moved to escort her away, she refused to let her captors see her break. "Take her to the servants' quarters," Bjorn ordered. "See that she's fed and given proper clothing. She'll serve in the main hall." "My lord," interrupted Magnus, Bjorn's grizzled captain, "surely a slave who speaks so boldly should be taught proper respect first. The lash has a way of curing insolent tongues." Bjorn's eyes flashed dangerously. "The girl is mine now, Magnus. I'll decide how she's to be treated." The warning in his voice was unmistakable. This was not a matter for debate. As Aisling was led through the cold stone corridors toward her new prison, she caught glimpses of life in the Viking stronghold. Servants scurried about their duties with downcast eyes, while warriors lounged by fires, sharing ale and tales of conquest. The smell of roasting meat and wood smoke filled the air, along with the harsh laughter of men who lived by the sword. Her cell was a small chamber in the servants' wing, barely large enough for a straw mattress and wooden bucket, but cleaner than she'd expected. A serving woman brought her a simple brown wool dress to replace her torn gown, along with bread, meat, and weak ale. "You're either very brave or very stupid," the woman whispered as she set down the food. "No one talks to Prince Bjorn like that and lives to see another sunrise." "Then perhaps your prince is not as fearsome as he pretends?" Aisling replied quietly, though she couldn't hide the tremor in her voice. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She was alone, far from home, surrounded by enemies who could kill her on a whim. That night, as she lay on the rough straw mattress listening to the wind howl through the fortress walls, Aisling allowed herself a single tear for everything she'd lost, but by morning her resolve had hardened like steel in a forge. She would not break for these Norse barbarians. She would find a way to escape, to return to her homeland and her people. She had no way of knowing that in a chamber high above, Prince Bjorn lay awake as well, staring at the ceiling and wondering why he couldn't stop thinking about a pair of defiant emerald eyes that had looked at him without fear. Dawn came cold and grey to Ironhold, and with it, Aisling's first day as a slave in the house of her enemy. She was awakened by Ingrid, the head-serving woman, a stern-faced Norse woman who had served the royal family for decades and brooked no nonsense from newcomers. "Up, thrall," Ingrid commanded, her voice sharp as winter wind. "Prince Bjorn breaks his fast at sunrise, and the hall must be ready. You'll serve at the high table today, and mind your tongue. One wrong word, and you'll find yourself in chains in the dungeons." Aisling bit back a dozen sharp retorts and instead focused on the tasks at hand. She helped lay out the morning meal: fresh bread, salted fish, thick porridge with honey, and strong ale that could knock a lesser man senseless. The great hall slowly filled with nobles and warriors, their loud voices and crude laughter echoing off the stone walls. When Prince Bjorn entered, the room fell into respectful silence. He strode to his place at the high table with the fluid grace of a predator, his pale hair catching the light from the great hearth. Aisling found herself studying his face, the strong jaw, the ice-blue eyes that seemed to see everything, the way he carried himself with absolute confidence. He was handsome, she realized with a start, in the dangerous way of all apex predators. "Allies," he commanded without looking up from his food. Aisling approached with the heavy pitcher, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the first time she'd been alone with him since the auction, and she wasn't sure what to expect. As she poured the golden liquid into his horn cup, she was acutely aware of his presence, the heat radiating from his body, the scent of leather and steel that clung to him. "You're different from the others," Bjorn said suddenly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "They fear me." "You don't—" "Fear and respect are not the same thing, my lord," Aisling replied carefully, keeping her eyes focused on the task of pouring ale. "One is given freely, the other is taken by force." "And which do you give me, Irish princess?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Aisling finally met his gaze, those piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight through to her soul. "Neither," she answered honestly. "You have earned neither from me." Instead of anger, something that might have been admiration flashed across Bjorn's features. "At least you're honest. That's more than I get from most of my court." He gestured toward the nobles gathered around the table, men who nodded and smiled and agreed with his every word. "They tell me what they think I want to hear, perhaps because they fear the consequences of truth." "And you don't?" Aisling set down the pitcher and looked him directly in the eyes. "I've already lost everything that matters to me. What more can you take?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, the mask of princely authority slipped, and she saw something unexpected in his expression, loneliness perhaps, or a hunger for something that gold and power couldn't buy. Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of Magnus, who approached with news of raiders spotted along the southern coast. But as Bjorn turned his attention to matters of war and strategy, Aisling couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just passed between them. A recognition of sorts, one captive soul calling to another across the divide of their circumstances. 3 weeks passed, and Aisling settled into the strange rhythm of life as a royal servant. She served meals, cleaned chambers, and learned the harsh Norse language from the other thralls. But unlike the broken souls around her, she never stopped watching, learning, planning for the day she might find her freedom. Prince Bjorn watched her too. Though he tried to be subtle about it, he found excuses to be present when she served in the hall, and sometimes caught himself listening for her voice among the servants. There was something about her spirit that called to him, the way she moved with quiet dignity despite her circumstances, the intelligence that flickered in her green eyes, the strength that seemed undiminished by captivity. The court began to whisper. Why did the prince show such interest in a mere thrall? Some suggested he should simply take her to his bed and be done with it. She was his property, after all. But Bjorn found himself reluctant to use his power that way. Something about Aisling demanded more than mere possession. One evening, as Aisling was cleaning the great hall after the feast, she found herself alone with the prince. He had dismissed his guards and sat by the dying fire, a cup of ale in his hand and a thoughtful expression on his scarred face. "Tell me about your homeland," he said without preamble. Aisling paused in her sweeping, surprised by the request. "Why would you care about Ireland?" "Humor me." He gestured for her to sit across from him, an extraordinary breach of protocol that would have scandalized the court. "I've conquered many lands, but I know nothing of their souls." Hesitantly, Aisling perched on the edge of a bench. "It's green," she began slowly, "greener than anything you have here in the north. The hills roll like waves, covered in grass so soft you could sleep on it. There are forests older than memory, where the druids say the spirits still dance on moonlit nights." Her voice grew warmer as she spoke, painting pictures of morning mist over quiet lakes, of ancient stone circles where her ancestors had worshipped, of the music that flowed through her people like lifeblood, harps and pipes and voices raised in songs that could make warriors weep. Bjorn listened in fascination, seeing not just a land of conquest, but a place of beauty and deep roots. "And your family?" "My father was a good king. He ruled with wisdom, not just strength. My mother died when I was small, but she taught me that true power comes from serving others, not ruling them." Aisling's voice caught slightly. "I had 3 brothers, warriors all, but they loved poetry as much as swordplay. I wonder if they still live, if they think of me." "You speak of them as if they're dead." "Aren't they? I'll never see them again. I'll never walk the hills of Erin or hear the ocean sing against the cliffs. That Aisling died the day your ships appeared on our shore." Bjorn set down his cup and leaned forward. What if she didn't have to stay dead? The question hung between them, dangerous and full of possibilities. Aisling searched his face, looking for the trap she was certain must be there. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that perhaps there are different kinds of freedom. Perhaps—" He was interrupted by the crash of the hall doors opening. Magnus strode in with urgent news. Ships had been spotted approaching under cover of darkness, and they bore no friendly banners. As Bjorn rose to deal with the crisis, their eyes met across the firelit hall. Something had shifted between them in those stolen moments of honesty, something that would change both their destinies. The attack came at dawn, as Aisling was drawing water from the well in the courtyard. War horns shattered the morning quiet, followed by the clash of steel and the screams of the dying. Enemy Vikings had breached the outer walls under cover of pre-dawn darkness, raiders from the rival clan of Bloodaxe, seeking to claim Ironhold's wealth and weaken Prince Bjorn's growing power. Chaos erupted throughout the fortress. Warriors scrambled for weapons while servants fled to the inner keep. Aisling found herself caught in the courtyard as fighting surged around her. Bjorn's men locked in desperate combat with the attackers, blood staining the ancient stones red. She could have run, should have run. This was not her fight, and in the confusion, she might even escape entirely. But as she saw Prince Bjorn fighting outnumbered against 3 Bloodaxe warriors near the great hall entrance, something inside her rebelled against the thought of abandoning him to die. Without thinking, Aisling grabbed a fallen warrior's sayax, a single-edged knife still sharp enough to kill. She'd been trained in combat by her father's best warriors, skills she'd thought she'd never need again. Now they might be the difference between life and death. Moving like a shadow, she crept behind one of Bjorn's attackers and drove the blade between his ribs with a warrior's precision. The man dropped with a gurgle of surprise, evening the odds, just enough for Bjorn to rally and drive back his remaining foes. When the last blood-axe raider lay dead at their feet, Bjorn turned to find Aisling standing over the body of the man she'd killed, the bloody sayax still trembling in her hands. Her green eyes were wide with shock. Taking a life, even in defense of another, was never easy. "Why?" Bjorn asked, his voice rough with exertion and something deeper. "You could have escaped in the chaos. Why did you save me?" Aisling looked down at the weapon in her hands, then back at his face. "I don't know," she whispered. "I just couldn't watch you die." Before either could say more, Magnus and the surviving guards surrounded them, securing the area and accounting for the dead. But as they dealt with the aftermath of battle, Bjorn couldn't stop thinking about the moment he'd seen Aisling risk her life for his, a slave who owed him nothing, who had every reason to wish him dead, had instead chosen to save him. Later that evening, as the fortress settled into an uneasy peace, Bjorn came to her quarters. He found her sitting on her small bed, staring at her hands as if she could still see blood on them. "I've brought you something," he said, setting down a bundle wrapped in fine cloth. Inside was a dress of deep green silk, embroidered with golden threads in Celtic knotwork patterns. It was the most beautiful thing Aisling had seen since leaving Ireland, a gown fit for a princess, not a thrall. "I can't accept this," she said, though her fingers traced the exquisite fabric with obvious longing. "Today you fought like a shield maiden of legend," Bjorn replied. "You saved my life when you could have saved yourself. A debt like that demands repayment." "And what debt do I owe you for the gift?" Bjorn's ice-blue eyes met hers with startling intensity. "None. This is freely given, as all the best gifts should be." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither dared voice. They both knew they were standing at the edge of something that could never be undone. Master and slave, Viking and Celt, captor and captive, yet somehow finding in each other what they'd been missing all their lives. Word of the battle spread quickly through Ironhold, and with it whispers about the Irish thrall who had fought like a Valkyrie to save their prince. Some called it loyalty, born of gratitude. Others whispered of darker enchantments. But none dared voice their suspicions openly, not when Prince Bjorn's favor clearly protected the girl. For Aisling, wearing the beautiful green dress felt like stepping back into her old life, if only for a moment. When she appeared in the great hall that evening, conversation stopped and heads turned. She looked every inch the Celtic princess she had been born to be, despite the iron collar that still marked her as a slave. King Harold, Bjorn's father, had arrived that afternoon to assess the damage from the raid. The old king was a legend among the Norse, a conqueror who had united the scattered clans through strength and cunning. His pale eyes, so like his son's, missed nothing as they swept the hall. "So this is the thrall everyone speaks of," Harold said, studying Aisling with the intensity of a hunter evaluating prey, "the one who saved my son's life." "She fought bravely, father," Bjorn said carefully. "Her actions deserve recognition." Indeed they do." Harold rose from his throne and approached Aisling, who met his gaze without flinching, the same defiance that had first caught Bjorn's attention. "Tell me, girl, what do you want as reward for your service?" The hall fell silent. This was unprecedented, a king offering to grant a boon to a mere slave. Aisling felt the weight of every eye upon her, the tension so thick it could be cut with a blade. "I want my freedom," she said simply. Harold laughed, a sound like winter wind. "Of course you do, but freedom must be earned, not given, and the price for yours would be higher than you imagine." "Name it," Aisling replied without hesitation. The old king's smile was sharp as a wolf's teeth. "Marry my son." The words hit the hall like a thunderbolt. Gasps echoed off the stone walls as nobles and warriors struggled to process what they'd heard. A thrall, no matter how brave, marrying a prince? It was unthinkable, scandalous, revolutionary. Bjorn stepped forward, his face pale with shock. "Father, you can't be serious." "Oh, but I am." Harold's eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement or calculation. "She's proven her courage and loyalty beyond question. She's of royal blood, even if she's currently in chains. And, most importantly, he paused, looking between his son and the Irish girl. You're already in love with her. The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Bjorn's jaw clenched as he fought to maintain his composure, while Aisling felt her cheeks burn with a blush that confirmed what words could not. The choice is yours, thrall, Harold continued. Accept my son's hand, and gain not only your freedom but a crown, or remain as you are and watch as duty eventually forces him to marry another. Aisling looked at Bjorn, seeing the conflict raging behind his ice-blue eyes. He wanted to deny his father's words, she could see that, but he couldn't quite manage it. The truth was written in every line of his face. He did love her, against all reason and social order. And if I refuse? She asked quietly. Then you remain a slave forever, Harold replied with brutal honesty. But my son will still care for you, and that caring will destroy any chance he has at true happiness with another. The cruel wisdom of it took her breath away. By forcing the choice into the open, the old king had eliminated all the safe middle ground where their forbidden feelings could remain unspoken and therefore harmless. Aisling closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders. When she opened them again, her voice was steady as stone. I accept. 6 months later, on the first warm day of spring, Aisling stood on the cliffs overlooking the sea, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, where new life grew. The iron collar was long gone, replaced by a torque of twisted gold that marked her as a princess of the Norse. Behind her, the sounds of construction echoed across the land, workers building the new settlement that would bridge the gap between Viking and Celtic cultures. Any regrets? Bjorn asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his strong arms around her waist. His touch was gentle, reverent, still amazed that she was truly his. Aisling leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her shoulders. How can I regret finding my true home? She replied, her Irish accent now softened by months of speaking Norse. How can I regret discovering that love is stronger than chains? The wedding had been a revelation, a ceremony that blended Viking and Celtic traditions, watched by representatives of both peoples. When Bjorn had removed the slave collar with his own hands and replaced it with the golden torque of a free woman, there hadn't been a dry eye in the hall. Even old King Harold had seemed moved by the sight of his son's obvious joy. Now they ruled together, Bjorn with his warrior's strength and Aisling with her wisdom and compassion. The settlement below was proof of what could be accomplished when former enemies chose cooperation over conflict. Celtic farmers taught Viking warriors the secrets of the soil, while Norse shipbuilders learned new techniques from Irish craftsmen. Our child will grow up knowing both worlds, Bjorn murmured against her hair. Viking strength and Celtic wisdom. There'll be a bridge between our peoples. They'll be free, Aisling corrected softly, free to choose their own path, to love without barriers, to see people as individuals rather than enemies. That's the greatest gift we can give them. As the sun climbed higher, painting the sea in shades of gold and emerald, they walked hand in hand back toward their home. The settlement buzzed with activity, children playing together regardless of their heritage, merchants haggling in a mixture of languages, former slaves working alongside their former masters as equals. Sometimes I think about that first day, Aisling said, pausing at the settlement's edge, when I stood before your throne in chains and told you that loyalty couldn't be bought. You were right, Bjorn admitted, his ice-blue eyes warm with love and admiration. The best things in life, trust, respect, love, they can only be freely given. You taught me that. And you taught me that even the coldest heart can learn to love, given the right reason. As they entered their hall, a place where Celtic harps played alongside Norse war songs, where emerald-green banners hung beside wolf emblems, Aisling marveled at the journey that had brought them here, from captive to princess, from enemy to beloved, from despair to hope incarnate. Their love story would be told for generations. The Irish thrall who conquered a Viking prince not with submission, but with courage, not with fear, but with an unbreakable spirit that refused to be caged. In the end, the greatest victory hadn't been won with sword or axe, but with two hearts brave enough to love across the divides of culture, class, and conquest.